"You eat but don't help," he said loud enough for the neighbors to hear, soft enough to pretend it was a joke. The sound of laughter cracked through ribs, sizzling on a grill. 15 neighbors. One sentence. 38 years of dignity gone quiet. Harlan Blackwood stood frozen, tongs clutched in his weathered hand. His son Mason's words hung in the air like smoke. The Memorial Day barbecue suddenly felt like a public execution. Nadia from next door touched Harlan's arm. "These ribs smell divine," she said, trying to patch the moment. But the damage was done. Across the yard, Mason's wife Zoe sipped her wine, eyes darting between her husband and father-in-law. Their teenage twins, Phoenix and Violet, stared at their phones, pretending not to notice. Harlan nodded, turned the meat, and smiled. "The kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. Just doing what I can," he said quietly. As laughter resumed and conversations restarted, Harlan's mind drifted to 38 years earlier, to concrete foundations and timber frames, to promises whispered between him and Fiona, to the house they built together, the same house his son now treated like an inheritance already claimed. Tonight was supposed to be simple. A family gathering, neighbors, good food. Instead, with 8 words, Mason had stripped away something precious. Harlan placed the ribs on a serving platter, his movements mechanical. He'd spent 4 hours preparing this meal, marinating, smoking, tending coals, all while Mason lounged by the pool with friends. "More drinks, everyone?" Mason called out, playing host in a house he hadn't built. Harlan's fingers tightened around the serving tray. Something cold settled in his chest. Not anger, but clarity. The kind that comes when you finally see what's been in front of you all along. As he set down the platter of ribs, Harlan caught his reflection in the kitchen window. His eyes held a question he'd never considered before. What if the house they thought was theirs wasn't? Behind him, Mason laughed with the neighbors, pouring expensive bourbon Harlan had gifted him last Christmas. The sound of ice in glasses, the scent of smoke, the weight of disrespect. Harlan reached for his wallet, feeling for the folded document he'd carried for decades but never thought he'd need. What would happen if he stopped being silent? 1978. Harlan stood in pouring rain, concrete mixer churning behind him. 26 years old with nothing but calloused hands and determination. "You're crazy to pour in this weather," his brother Theo had said that morning. But Harlan knew what others didn't. Sometimes foundations set stronger when tested by elements. Fiona appeared beside him, raincoat glistening, thermos in hand. "Your coffee, builder of dreams," she whispered, kissing his cheek. They'd met at architecture school. She had the vision. He had the skills to make it reality. Together, they designed this house. Every corner, every window placement, calculated to capture light. The bank had laughed at their loan application. Too young, too ambitious. So they saved, worked double shifts, bought this hillside land when nobody wanted it. "One day," Fiona had said, "this view will be worth millions." Rain soaked Harlan's shirt as he worked the concrete, each movement a prayer, their future home taking shape beneath his hands. Later, as moonlight broke through clouds, Fiona pressed a piece of paper against a wooden beam. "When the sun hits right here, plant your roses," her elegant handwriting instructed. He covered it with clear varnish, preserving her words beneath layers of protection. 6 months of weekends, 14-hour days. Neighbors started stopping by, watching this house rise from nothing. "You're building legacy, old mister," Faulkner from down the road said. "That's rare these days." By winter, walls stood strong. By spring, windows captured the promised light. By summer, Fiona's garden bloomed where once was barren soil. They moved in on their anniversary. No mortgage, just pride. Then came winter again, and with it, the cough Fiona couldn't shake. "Promise me," she whispered one night, fingers tracing the bedroom wall he'd built. "Promise this house will always shelter love." Harlan watched his hands age through decades after. Young, strong, lined, tired, as he maintained every inch of the property. Replaced roof shingles, updated wiring, refinished floors, always honoring her memory through maintenance. When Mason married Zoe, they needed a place to stay, just temporarily. 5 years later, they were still there. The word "Dad's house" slowly transformed into "our place" in conversations with friends. Harlan noticed but said nothing. After all, family was meant to inherit eventually. wasn't it? Yet something shifted each time they painted over another memory without asking. Each time they complained about the creaking stairs he'd hand-cut from oak. What happens when temporary becomes permanent? But gratitude doesn't. Dad, since we're covering groceries, maybe you could chip in for utilities? Mason's question hung over Sunday breakfast. 3 months after they'd moved in, 5 years before the barbecue. Harlan paused, fork midair. I paid off the utilities for the next year, he said quietly. And the property taxes? Oh, Mason exchanged glances with Zoe. Well, maybe contribute to the renovation fund then? We're thinking of updating that outdated kitchen. The kitchen, Harlan had renovated himself just 5 years earlier. The granite countertops Fiona had selected from her hospital bed, planning a future she wouldn't see. Sure, Harlan said, swallowing something bitter that had nothing to do with the coffee. The shifts came gradually. Mason's name added to the mailbox. Holiday cards addressed to the Blackwood family instead of Harlan Blackwood. At dinner parties, Harlan overheard Zoe telling friends about when we bought this place, a subtle rewriting of history that went uncorrected. Family photos migrated. Harlan's wedding portrait with Fiona moved from the living room to the upstairs hallway, then to a spare bedroom, then into a box labeled Dad Stuff. Holidays brought relatives who complimented Mason and Zoe on their beautiful home. Nobody mentioned the man who'd mixed concrete in the rain. Harlan retreated to the garage workshop he'd built, the only space still undeniably his. There, surrounded by tools worn smooth from decades of use, he could still hear Fiona's laughter echoing from another time. One evening, Harlan overheard the twins in their bedroom. Grandpa's kind of weird. Just sitting around all day, Phoenix said. Mom says he's lucky we let him stay here, Violet replied. Houses this size are worth millions now. Let him stay. In the home he'd built with his own hands. That night, Harlan couldn't sleep. He slipped outside at midnight, walking the property boundaries, touching the oak tree he'd preserved by designing the house around it, running his fingers along the exterior walls, feeling for the imperfections only a builder would know. The next morning, Mason and Zoe announced plans to convert Harlan's workshop into a home gym. We figure you don't really use all those tools anymore, Zoe explained, not quite meeting his eyes. And Phoenix wants to start strength training. Harlan nodded, a new stillness settling inside him. That afternoon, he visited his safety deposit box at Oak Ridge Credit Union. The document was exactly where he'd left it, yellow with age but legally binding. His name, only his name. What was that feeling spreading through his chest? Not anger. Something colder. Something clearer. Harlan noticed on a Tuesday. The hallway wall seemed emptier, brighter paint where a frame had hung for decades. Fiona's garden sketch, her pencil marks showing where flower beds should go, where trees would provide afternoon shade, was gone. Zoe, redecorated. Mason, explained that evening, not looking up from his tablet. That old drawing was fading anyway. Fading, like memories, like respect. Later, scrolling through social media on the phone his grandchildren had insisted he needed, Harlan saw Zoe's post. Finally bringing this old house into this century. Number home renovation, number dream home. The comments section bloomed with praise. You guys have the best taste. Love what you've done with your place. That view is everything. So lucky to call it yours. Yours. The photos showed rooms transformed. His and Fiona's bedroom now an exercise space with gleaming equipment. The reading nook where she'd spent her final weeks now housed Phoenix's gaming setup. No mention of history, of building, of Harlan. That Saturday, Harlan overheard Mason on the phone with a realtor friend. Just curious about the market, if we decided to sell down the road. Yeah, Dad wouldn't mind moving to a retirement community. More practical at his age. Harlan's hands trembled as he watered Fiona's rose bushes, the only part of her garden plan that remained. That night, he dreamed of concrete foundations crumbling, of his name being erased from beams and joists, of Fiona's voice asking, "What happened to our forever home?" The next morning, a moving truck arrived, new furniture for the living room. We donated your old couch to Goodwill, Zoe informed him, scrolling through her phone. It was dragging down the aesthetic, the couch where Harlan had proposed to Fiona, where they'd planned this very house, blueprints spread across cushions. He nodded, said nothing. At dinner, Mason announced, "We're thinking of adding a pool next summer. Might need to cut down those old oak trees for the clearance." The trees Fiona had insisted they preserve. The trees that had witnessed their first kiss on this property. I see, Harlan said. Later, he found Fiona's garden sketch crumpled in the recycling bin. He smoothed it carefully, noticing a water stain that hadn't been there before. Someone had spilled something on it before discarding it. He folded the paper gently, slipped it into his wallet next to the deed. That night, Harlan researched property values in their neighborhood on his phone. His eyes widened at the numbers. The hillside view Fiona had predicted would be valuable someday. She'd been right. $4.2 million right. Memorial Day arrived with perfect weather. Neighbors gathered on the lawn Harlan had graded by hand 40 years earlier. He'd spent the morning preparing. Marinated ribs, cleaned the grill he'd restored last winter, the one with H+F carved into the wooden handle. He'd set tables with Fiona's favorite blue tablecloth, found buried in the attic where Mason had stored unnecessary items. Familiar faces filled the backyard. The Parkers from down the street, Dr. Velasquez and her wife, even old Theo, Harlan's brother, visiting for the weekend. Beautiful place your son has here, someone commented to Harlan. He smiled tightly, tending the grill. Mason played host magnificently, pouring drinks, telling stories, accepting compliments about renovations with practiced humility. Dad's retired now, he explained to newcomers, hand on Harlan's shoulder. We take care of everything. Harlan focused on cooking, the rhythm of turning meat offering small comfort. When the ribs were perfect, charred edges, tender centers, he arranged them on Fiona's serving platter, the one she'd inherited from her grandmother, the one Zoe had rediscovered while organizing that cluttered china cabinet. Harlan carried the platter toward the tables, his contribution, his labor. Finally, Mason called out, glass raised. Dad's specialty arrives, though I'm not sure it's worth the wait. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. You eat, but don't help, he added, loud enough for neighbors to hear, soft enough to pretend it was a joke. The platter nearly slipped from Harlan's grasp. 15. Neighbors. One sentence. 38 years of dignity gone quiet. Theo stood abruptly, but Harlan shook his head slightly. Not here. Not now. He set down the platter, straightened his spine, smiled that smile that never reached his eyes. The party continued around him, Mason holding court, Zoe showing off new landscaping plans, designs that would erase the last traces of Fiona's garden. Later, as guests departed, Harlan overheard the twins talking with friends by the fire pit he'd built. Grandpa's getting weird about everything lately, Phoenix said. Acts like he owns the place. Laughter erupted. Harlan slipped away to his bedroom, the smallest in the house now, formerly a guest room. The master bedroom had become Mason and Zoe's years ago. He opened his nightstand drawer. Behind old reading glasses and pill bottles lay a business card. Reese Valentina, luxury real estate. When you're ready to maximize your investment, it promised. Harlan's fingers hovered over his phone. Was he ready? 3 days after the barbecue, Harlan woke before dawn. The house creaked around him, familiar sounds, a language only he understood. Each pop and groan a conversation with the past. He dressed silently, listening to Mason and Zoe's snores from down the hall. Their bedroom door, his old bedroom door, left open, as if no one could possibly disturb their domain. Harlan slipped into his closet, reaching behind hanging shirts to the metal lockbox he'd installed before Mason and Zoe moved in. Inside, birth certificates, insurance policies, and a sealed envelope he hadn't opened in years. The deed, yellow-edged, official, undeniable. He spread it on his bed, reading by phone light. His signature, the notary's stamp, the legal language stark and clear. Sole owner, Harlan James Blackwood. No transfers, no amendments, no co-owners. His pulse slowed. A peculiar calm settled over him. Outside, the sun touched the oak trees. Light filtered through leaves, casting dappled shadows. On the hardwood floors he'd installed by hand. Floors Mason had talked about replacing with something more contemporary. Harlan opened his laptop, a gift from the twins last Christmas, given with exaggerated patience as they explained technology to their out-of-touch grandfather. Property values, market trends, recent sales. His eyes widened at the numbers. The neighborhood had exploded in value. Developers hungry for hillside lots with views. Tech executives fleeing city prices. $4.2 million, conservatively, for the house they thought was theirs. He heard Mason stirring, the shower starting. Soon the day's routines would begin. Mason heading to his consulting job, Zoe to her boutique, the twins to summer activities, all of them leaving, none of them seeing. Harlan folded the deed carefully, returned it to his wallet. At breakfast, Mason complained about property taxes, highway robbery. He called it, unaware who actually paid them. "Did you know," Harlan said casually, buttering toast, "that silence isn't always weakness?" "What?" Mason glanced up, distracted. "Nothing," Harlan replied. "Just something I've been thinking about." After they left, the house fell quiet. Harlan stood in each room, touching doorframes he'd installed, windowsills he'd cut, walls he'd plastered. He pulled out Reese Valentina's business card, stared at it for a long moment. His thumb hovered over his phone. What would Fiona say? The question echoed in his mind. Then he remembered the vandalized garden sketch, the "you eat but don't help" comment, the "lucky we let him stay" whispers. Harlan dialed the number. "Reese Valentina," a crisp voice answered. "This is Harlan Blackwood," he said, his voice steadier than it had been in years. "I'd like to discuss selling my house." Discreetly. As he spoke, something like purpose straightened his spine. "Not revenge," he told himself. "Justice. They don't know you're selling?" Reese Valentina asked, studying Harlan across her gleaming desk. 1 week later, Harlan met her gaze. "They stopped asking what I do a long time ago." Reese nodded slowly, tapping manicured nails against the deed he'd provided. "Verified. Legitimate. Ironclad. We'll need to be strategic," she said. "Private showings only. When is the house typically empty?" "Tuesdays and Thursdays. Mason has client meetings. Zoe has yoga, then lunch with friends. Twins at summer programs." Reese's smile was all business. Perfect. The plan unfolded with quiet precision. Tuesday. Professional cleaners while the family was out. "A gift from a friend," Harlan explained when Zoe noticed the lingering scent of lemon polish. Wednesday. Photographers disguised as maintenance workers. "Just documenting some repairs," Harlan told Phoenix when questioned. Thursday. The first showing. 3 serious buyers. Silicon Valley tech executive, foreign investor, local developer. "We could sell as is," Reese whispered as they walked potential buyers through rooms Harlan had built decade by decade. "But strategic upgrades could push us over $5 million. Harlan shook his head. "I don't want this dragged out. 4.2 is more than enough." Each night, he erased evidence of the day's activities, deleted browser history, removed yard measurement stakes before the family returned, intercepted mail from the county assessor. "You seem different lately," Zoe commented over dinner one evening. "More energetic." "Just enjoying each day," Harlan replied, hiding his smile behind his water glass. The offers arrived exactly as Reese predicted. The tech executive won the bidding war. $4.35 million, all cash, 30-day close, non-refundable deposit. Harlan signed the papers in Reese's office, while his family attended a neighbor's graduation party. "Are you sure about this?" Reese asked, sliding the final document across the desk. "Once this processes," Harlan's pen didn't hesitate. His signature, the same one that had signed the original deed, flowed across the page. "I've never been more certain," he said. That night, Mason talked about converting Harlan's bedroom into a home theater once he eventually moved to assisted living. Harlan nodded, sipped his tea. 29 days until closing. 29 days until they learned the truth. In his room, he checked the secure email Reese had helped him create. The confirmation waited in his inbox. Funds to be wired upon closing. New residence secured. He'd found a small lakefront cabin 3 hours north. Peaceful. Remote. His. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was downsizing from a mansion to a cabin, while his family planned to expand into his remaining space. They just didn't know they'd be expanding somewhere else entirely. As Harlan closed his laptop, a text from Reese lit up his phone. "Buyers want to move up closing date. 2 weeks instead of 30 days. Possible?" Harlan's heart quickened. 2 weeks. 14 days until everything changed. Was he really going through with this? On closing day, Harlan woke before sunrise. He packed a single suitcase, clothes, tools, photographs, Fiona's garden sketch, their wedding album, the small wooden box containing her ashes, everything that mattered. He left the furniture, the appliances, the accumulated wealth of decades that had become invisible to those who benefited from it. At precisely 9 a.m., his phone buzzed. A text from Reese. Funds transferred. Congratulations. Just like that, 38 years of homeownership concluded in a digital transaction. Harlan stood in the kitchen, brewing a final cup of coffee. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, no longer weighing on his shoulders. At 10 a.m., the locksmith arrived. "Around back, please," Harlan directed. New keys, new codes, new ownership. At 11 a.m., Reese's assistant delivered the sign. "For sale" crossed out with a bold red "sold." Harlan himself hammered it into the front lawn. Then he waited. Mason arrived home first, parking his luxury SUV in the driveway. Harlan watched through the living room window as his son noticed the sign, did a double take, then sprinted toward the house. "Dad! Dad!" Mason burst through the door. "There's a sold sign on our lawn." "What the hell?" Harlan sat calmly, hands folded on the kitchen table, the deed and sale documents arranged neatly before him. "Not your lawn," he said quietly. "Mine." Mason's face contorted. "What are you talking about? Is this a joke?" "You said I eat but don't help," Harlan replied, sliding the papers forward. "So I helped. I just didn't tell you how." Mason snatched the documents, eyes darting across legal language, numbers, signatures. This can't be legal," he stammered. "You can't just, it's entirely legal," Harlan said. "The house was never in your name, never promised to you. You just assumed." Mason's phone buzzed repeatedly. "Zoe, the twins, neighbors calling about the sign. Where are we supposed to go?" Mason's voice cracked, anger giving way to panic. Harlan stood, lifting his suitcase. "That's not my problem anymore. Dad, please. The new owners take possession tomorrow. I suggest you start packing." Harlan walked to the door, pausing at the threshold. The weight of decades of silently absorbing disrespect, of watching his contributions be erased, lifted from his shoulders. "One more thing," he said, turning back. "The oak trees stay. That was a condition of the sale." Outside, neighbors had gathered, whispering behind hands, pointing at the sign. At Mason's ashen face in the doorway, Harlan walked to his truck, placed his suitcase in the passenger seat, and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, he watched Zoe's car screech into the driveway, saw her running toward the house, heard her cry of disbelief even through closed windows. He should have felt satisfaction. Instead, he felt something unexpected. Freedom. As he pulled away, his phone lit up with Mason's name. Should he answer? The cabin welcomed Harlan with rustic simplicity. Pine walls, stone fireplace, windows framing lake views. Fiona would have sketched endlessly. He unpacked methodically, arranging photographs on knotty pine shelves, her ashes on the mantel, his tools organized in the small workshop off the kitchen. 3 days passed, then a week. His phone accumulated, voicemails, texts, emails, all unanswered. "Mason, you can't do this to your own family." "Zoe, the children are devastated." "Neighbors, is it true what they're saying?" "Even Theo, dramatic move, brother, call me." Harlan silenced notifications, focused instead on small repairs around the cabin, fixed loose boards on the deck, rewired faulty outlets. Activities where results were tangible, appreciation, unnecessary. Meanwhile, social media exploded with his story. Someone, Theo, he suspected, had leaked details to a local news outlet. Grandfather sells home from under-entitled family. Comments sections divided sharply. Cold-blooded revenge on his own children. Hero standing up to entitled kids. Who does this to family? Who treats their father that way? Harlan avoided it all, finding peace in the rhythm of lake waves against the shore. 2 weeks after moving, he ventured into the small town nearby. At the grocery store, a woman stared, then approached. "You're him, aren't you? The man who sold his house?" Harlan nodded reluctantly. "My son moved in with me 5 years ago," she said quietly. "Temporary," he said. "Now he complains if dinner's not ready when he gets home." She squeezed his arm. "You're braver than me." That night, Harlan sat on his deck, watching moonlight dance across water. For the first time in years, he spoke aloud to Fiona. "Did I do the right thing?" Wind rustled through pines. The lake lapped gently at the shore. A text illuminated his phone. From Phoenix, "Grandpa, are you ever coming back?" Simple words, complicated emotions. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived. Legal letterhead. Mason's lawyer demanding access to funds from the family home. Harlan filed it away, unopened. He busied himself planting a small garden beside the cabin. Tomatoes, herbs, a rosebush like the one Fiona had loved. Then came the knock. Harlan opened his door to find Violet standing on his porch, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes red-rimmed. "Mom and Dad won't stop fighting," she said. "They're staying at Uncle Theo's, but it's awful. Can I stay here for a few days?" Behind her, a taxi disappeared down the gravel road. Harlan stared at his granddaughter, the one who'd called him weird, who'd mocked his presence, who'd helped erase Fiona's touches from the house. Yet standing before him was just a 16-year-old girl. Lost. Hurting. What would Fiona do? "Come in," he said, stepping aside. "There's a spare room with a view of the lake." That night, as Violet slept, Harlan's phone lit up with Mason's number. This time, should he answer? Autumn painted the lakeside with crimson and gold when the second knock came. 3 months had passed since Violet's arrival. 3 months of quiet healing, of teaching her to fish, to identify birdsong, to build simple furniture in his workshop. Mason stood on the porch, shoulders hunched against October chill. No Zoe. Just him and 7-year-old Phoenix clutching his hand. "She misses her sister," Mason said, nodding toward the boy. "And you?" Harlan studied his son's face, thinner now, new lines etched around his eyes. "Come in," he said finally. "I just made soup." Dinner was silent at first. Spoons against bowls, wind against windows. Phoenix's whispered questions to Violet about lake creatures. "We're divorcing," Mason said abruptly, staring into his bowl. "Zoe and I." Harlan nodded, unsurprised. "The money's gone," Mason continued. "Most of it, bad investments. Lawyers." Another nod. Phoenix tugged Violet outside to see the dock Harlan had rebuilt. Through the window, their laughter carried across still water. "Do you hate me?" Mason asked, voice barely audible. Harlan considered the question, watching his grandchildren by the lake. "No," he said, finally. "But I had to remind you who built the ground you walk on." Mason's eyes welled. "I've been terrible." "Yes." "No." Absolution offered. "No easy forgiveness." "I found this," Mason said, sliding a folded paper across the table, Fiona's garden sketch, carefully restored. "I saved it from the recycle bin years ago. Kept it hidden from Zoe. It was all I had of Grandma." Harlan's fingers trembled as he opened it. The familiar lines, the notes in her handwriting, the vision that had guided his hands decades ago. Something shifted between them. Not forgiveness yet, but possibility. "We're staying at Theo's," Mason said. "The apartment we rented after everything, didn't work out." Harlan studied his son, no longer the confident man who'd mockingly said, "You eat but don't help," but not quite the boy who'd once helped him plant Fiona's roses, either. "There's a caretaker's cottage down the shore," Harlan said carefully. "Needs work, lots of work." Mason looked up, hope flickering. "I could fix it," he said. "I remember some things you taught me, before I stopped listening." Through the window, Phoenix squealed as Violet showed him how to skip stones across glass-still water. "It won't be easy," Harlan warned. "Building takes patience." "I have time," Mason replied. "And I need to learn." That night, after Mason and Phoenix left with promises to return Saturday, Violet found Harlan on the deck, staring at stars reflected in dark water. "Are you letting them move here, after everything?" Harlan considered her question, thinking of foundations poured in rain, of houses built by hand, of legacies more complex than property deeds. "Sometimes," he said, "you have to tear everything down to build something that lasts." His phone buzzed a message from Reese Valentina. "Harlan, you've gone viral. Book offers, interview requests. People want your story." He smiled, turned off his phone, and listened instead to the language of water against shore. Could anything built on ashes of betrayal truly stand? Tomorrow would tell.